Hi, everyone. My name is Gia. I'm the director at large for the Cuplet Fern chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society. Today, I'm here with Stefan Babjak. He's the owner of Wise Hands, which is a landscaping company. They do installations, consultation, and they are located and they work out of Pinellas and Hillsborough counties. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about some uncommon Florida native landscaping plants. So Stefan, I'm going to go ahead and bring up your presentation and we can go ahead and get started, all right?
Awesome, that sounds great. Thank you very much for the introduction, Gia. Appreciate it. All right. All righty. All right. Gia, are we all good? Everybody can see that good?
Yep, that looks great. We see it.
Okay, awesome. So good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody's enjoying this lovely weekend as much as I am. To be able to have a landscape maintenance and design and consultation company in Florida means we have a very big challenge in the summertime, keeping all the employees' morale up when it's 100 degrees outside, but it also means that we get to enjoy this weather right now. So I hope everybody is doing that. A little bit about Wise Hands. My background is at Wilcox Nursery and Landscape. And if you haven't gone there, it is in Pinellas County. It's in Largo. And it's run by Bruce Turley. And Bruce is a big name in the native plant world. He's been doing native plants and propagating them since the 80s, even earlier, before there was even a movement in native plants. So a big shout out to him and Wilcox Nursery, where I was the nursery production manager, and we saw a big need in the maintenance portion of native landscapes. I'm assuming a lot of people listening to this have native plants in their yards. I don't know how you guys do your maintenance, or if there are other companies around Florida, which I'm sure there are. If not, there definitely should be some more that primarily take care of native plants, but also plants in general and garden beds, kind of filling in the gap in between the turf management, if you do have turf, and let's say a tree company. So we kind of deal with everything else in between. So that's the story of Wise Hands. I started that with my wife, who's actually expecting in about a month. So we have a young Wise Handser on the way, which is pretty cool. So yeah, it's been a crazy year for a lot of people, but I hate to say it, it's been probably one of the best years of my life this last year, because we were outside all day, so we kept working. But another thing I'm very proud of is FNPS in general as a wider society in Florida. I don't know of any other state that has as good of a native plant society as Florida, especially what Mark Catelli and all the board of Cuplet Fern chapter have been doing with bringing the FNPS into the next century, into the new age, with all this interactivity, YouTube, Facebook, but making it something really fun and interactive. So I definitely appreciate what they're doing and thank them for inviting me. And I have to shout out FNPS Pinellas because we just secured a 44-acre parcel of property in Pinellas County. And if you don't know a lot about Pinellas, it's the most developed county in Florida. It's also pretty small compared to most other counties in Florida, actually, but it's a peninsula. So essentially an island. So there was very little undeveloped, untouched land left. And they, with the help of a lot of different community members and FNPS Pinellas, they saved 44 acres. It's called the Gladys Douglas property. I definitely recommend you to look it up, and hopefully soon it'll be something you guys can come and enjoy in Pinellas County, along with a trip to Wilcox. So now that I've gotten all those things out of the way, what I wanted to talk about today is South Florida plants that you could potentially use in a Central Florida climate. So wherever everybody is, all around the state, you have your certain hardiness zone, which we'll go over a little bit, but this is primarily for people that are from the Tampa Bay area over across that big swath of the state, which is slowly becoming Orlampa or Tampodo or something like that, just kind of a huge swath of development, which hopefully slows down a little bit and maybe we start, I don't know, building up or going back into the many areas of our cities that need an influx of building, but that's on a whole other subject. But so that's for mostly the people that would be in Seminole County, Orlando area, but all the way over into Volusia County where Gia is. So when I talk about South Florida, that's generally what I'm talking about, is everything south from Pinellas County, draw a line over to Volusia County. South of that is South Florida. And then Central Florida is up to about, I would say, Ocala area, that swath across. I mean, these are all rough estimates. It depends on your microclimate. If you're close to water, there's a lot of factors will go into that. And I definitely want to say too, we talked about it. I definitely welcome comments, and Gia can let me know if you know more about some of these things. I am not saying that I'm an absolute expert, because none of us are. I have some great books sitting right next to me that I can definitely share with you guys.
Absolutely. Well. And we can take questions live. So please feel free to ask your questions wherever you're viewing from. And I think that if you're viewing from Facebook, I'm not sure about some other platforms, but whenever you try to comment, it's going to ask you to put your name in, and it's helpful. That way we can see who you are. Otherwise, it doesn't show us your name. But yeah, please feel free to ask your questions as we go along. And I meant to interject earlier, and I kind of lost my opportunity, but I'm still going to say, I just want to congratulate you on your baby, and I know it's been keeping you busy. And also, Wilcox is awesome. So, are you still working for Wilcox?
So I was really, it was hard for me to leave because I had been there for almost 5 years, and it's what really changed my life and brought me into this direction of where I am now. But I worked every Sunday for about 9 months while also having full-time business. And finally I had to leave, and Bruce was like, I'm surprised you lasted this long. It was hard for me to leave, but it's where we get all our native plants from. It's where we get a lot of our referrals. I'm still close with everybody there. We're collaborating on different projects. So I always foresee that I'll have a great connection to Wilcox for sure.
That's fantastic. They're the first native nursery I ever visited, and they are wonderful. So if anybody's in the area and you're interested in purchasing native plants, that's where you can get them. It was Largo, you said, right? I believe
they're in Largo, right in the center of Pinellas County.
Yeah. Took me, I think, a 3-hour drive to get there, but it was worth it.
Luckily there's a lot of other things to do in Pinellas, and nice beaches right nearby, even though you guys have great beaches as well. But I'm glad you took the trip.
Yeah, I'll have to make a more of a longer trip to, like you said, go for other reasons and sightsee if it's going to be a 3-hour trip,
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. I really appreciate that, Gia. So I want to kind of get into just a short agenda. I'm going to try to keep it as simple as I can with the amount of text that I have on the screen. It's not really my style, but I do like to sometimes go on a thought train, not a tangent, but a little bit something like that. So I do like to really kind of go into my own personal experience with a lot of these plants. And that's all these plants that I picked are ones that I have physically seen, and they exist and can be bought. Because once you start looking into these awesome books that I will share with everybody at the end of this presentation, there are a plethora of beautiful, unique, amazing flowers that would make geraniums look like dog food. Like the flowers that are just the most amazing things, but either they're extremely rare and endangered, or they grow in a very, very specific type of environment that can never be, and I wouldn't say never, but has up till now has not been replicated in a nursery environment. Some of those milkweed species, lupines, just as an example of a few things. So the plants I'm going to be talking about are things that are actually available, and you should be able to get them from a Central or South Florida nursery. If you're in North Florida, you're probably not going to be able to get any of these unless you have a plant broker, or the nursery that you work with. There's a lot of great native nurseries or nurseries that have native plants can ship something in for you. So north, central, and south, why does it matter? It matters about, definitely the climate and the temperature. And that's kind of where these different environments are coming from. So for example, South Florida, what I did was I kind of picked, there's so many diverse ecosystems that occur throughout Florida. I've heard when we've gone out on in FNPS, when we've gone out on tours of restoration areas, for example, Swiftmud, our water management district, we had a gentleman who was talking about recreating a mosaic of habitats. So you had uplands going into a marsh, into a prairie, into a hardwood hammock, into a pine area, flowing out into a mangrove estuary. Like the mix of all these different habitats is what makes Florida so unique. So I tried to pick some habitats that I would think of, if just the first thing that would come to my mind when I think of South Florida and Central Florida. And I did grow up going to Jupiter and Palm Beach Gardens, where my grandmother lives. So I spent a lot of time going through there, but I didn't really know what I was looking at. And as an adult and doing what I'm doing now is where I've been in Central Florida, primarily Tampa Bay. So I definitely know more in depth about Central Florida habitats more than South Florida. But when I think of South Florida, you think of pine rocklands, which are very endangered. I think actually some of the habitat that we have in Florida is globally endangered, including scrub habitats. That means, you see people talking about the rainforest and the loss of biodiversity and habitat, and people scream about it and cry about it. But right in their backyard, maybe less than an hour away, there's a habitat that's also globally endangered. And when you lose something like a scrub habitat, for example, on the Lake Wales Ridge and central and going a little bit into South Florida, you lose a lot. So pine rocklands is one of those things. So fortunately, we can have some plants that we can use from those pine rocklands. You have mangrove systems, and just interesting to note about mangroves, I'm sure a lot of you know that, but they are not cold tolerant. There's a reason that as you get up, especially if you go up toward the Big Bend of Florida, into Citrus, Hernando County, if you've ever gone spring hopping, some amazing springs up there, you're going to see much less mangroves, and they kind of stop a little bit further north of Pinellas County, getting into Pasco and Hernando County, because it gets too cold and they freeze to the ground. So instead you have marshes up there, but that would be a North Florida thing. So mangrove systems are what make, for example, Florida Bay and the 10,000 Islands such an amazing place and so full of life and biodiversity. I was actually fishing today, didn't have any luck, but we were going through a mangrove system. Hammock forests, those are your areas where it's essentially an island that's raised up a little bit. In Florida, we measure elevation by inches. So it could be something that's raised up just a bit, and you have, for example, oaks there, whereas in the surrounding areas, you would have prairie, marsh grass, or different types of small shrubs. Wet and dry prairies, subtropical and tropical is what you hear a lot. We are subtropical. It doesn't really get truly tropical until the Keys, tropical being like, your Central America, places like that is a true tropical, where it's never going to get colder than some places, even 70 degrees, 65 or 70 is considered a very, very cold time there. And then South Florida, you deal with a year-round growing season for the most part, obviously depending on what part you're in, but it's great for maintenance companies. So we deal with a lot of people who have a landscape which is filled with what I call houseplants gone wild. So, pothos and schefflera and other schefflera and pepper and all that kind of stuff that people brought here and kind of let it go crazy. It's even worse in South Florida, but it's something that you would have to understand, and that would help you decide on what types of plants you're going to put where, especially if something is really going to be growing year round, even though it may slow down a bit during this time of the year, and we're actually having a pretty decent winter. So those are some ecosystems of South Florida that I'm going to be picking those plants from. Central Florida, I think first thing I think of, and I think a lot of people, is our pine flatwoods. Mostly a slash pine. And in the pine rocklands, I have to note the dominant species is the South Florida slash pine, but we also use that all over Central Florida. It's a very common pine to plant because it grows very fast. But we have our pine flatwoods. We do have deciduous hardwood trees. You know, you got your things like maples and sycamores and elms, which you're not going to really find too much as you get further into South Florida. You don't see too many deciduous trees because it just doesn't get cold enough, and a lot of those plants are not happy down there in the very warm weather. Your hammock forests, again, those are something that's going to be shared in both spaces. A lot of these habitats occur in both of these areas, of course. But then Central Florida, you get the marsh. You still have the mangrove. And then it goes from that subtropical, maybe you can kind of say it would be slightly tropical, right up next to, for example, I live in Gulfport. Gulfport is the furthest south in Pinellas County. So only a couple miles away from us, we have water. We have the mangrove areas, and then it goes down into Tampa Bay. So the water helps to kind of mitigate any kind of really cold weather that happens further inland. And then more temperate, what I would call temperate, you know, being places, you know, like Ocala and inland and up into Pasco County, places where it actually is going to get into, let's say, the 20s, where these parts of South Florida it's never going to get down that cold. At least I haven't seen that in my lifetime, but it's still a potential. You know, all these things are, Mother Nature does as she wishes. You know, it's not something that is set in stone. Obviously, as you know, that's why I love plants so much, is that they're so unique in so many different areas. But you have a dormancy. You know, it's kind of nice right now with going back to our maintenance, which is what we primarily do. We get a chance to kind of step back and take a break and take a breather and let the sweat finally evaporate back into the atmosphere. So just kind of painting a difference between what I'm saying by South and Central Florida. And this is not meant to be a rigid academic distinction between the two. Oh, sorry. What I was talking about earlier, the hardiness zones, you know, having a general idea. I got this from the USDA. There are a couple websites out there that kind of take it from their own personal experience. So make sure you're getting a reputable source if you really want to know exactly where your zone is. But another great way, and which is also what I always tell people when they ask me, what should I plant in my yard? What works? Well, unless you live in the middle of nowhere, or, I mean, it's awesome if you do, because then you can actually see some real Florida, but walk around your suburbs, walk around your area that you live in, and see what else is in the neighborhood, you know, especially mature stuff. If you have a South Florida species that's really mature, like let's say it's 40 or 50 years old, occurring in your area where you're not really sure if something like that could work, well, you can look and say, okay, well, something like that's been here for 30 or 40 or 50 years. That's gone through what I remember the hard freeze, somebody telling me of 89. So I was born in 89, but that's when there was a hard freeze in a lot of Florida, and it was pretty devastating for the citrus crop. And I know 2009 and 10, there was another pretty substantial freeze, and I believe 2017. So these things happen. A lot of time, once a plant gets mature enough, the damage will not go into like, for example, for a tree, it's not going to go into the heartwood. It's not going to freeze that tree's ability to move, you know, moisture and nutrients. If it freezes that, the entire tree will die, because essentially it's the cells have ruptured. And just like if you put a piece of lettuce in the freezer, it turns brown and mushy. That's essentially what's happening with these South Florida plants if they're exposed to these cold temperatures. So have an idea where you're at. And I'd like to talk a little bit about, once we go further on, about what I would mean by like microclimates. But hopefully this will get your general idea of where you guys are at. Take a note of that 9B, 10A. We're in 10A. You guys over there in Seminole County, of course, you're looking at 9B, but going into even 9A. So that further tip of where you are in Seminole County. And then Volusia, you know, inland, you guys maybe could even get into the teens if it wasn't especially cold time, but probably shouldn't get any colder than 20 at the most. If it gets in the 20s, yeah.
I'm glad you brought up the microclimates. It's weird. I mean, sometimes you just got to pay attention and see what happens if you've lived in the same house or location for a while. And I think that I might have a bit of a warmer microclimate where I am in Volusia. You know, it's very, very rare for me to get like a frost or anything. Whereas like 15 minutes down the street, our other director at large, Kaylee, she'll get freezes. I think she got frost several times this year. So, you know, just within like 15 minutes from each other, I mean, and she's in a different elevation than I am, like those little microclimates can really make a big difference.
That's really interesting. And it obviously also depends on the direction your house is facing. You know, if something is facing north, you can pretty safely assume that that's going to be a little cooler than something on the south or the southeast corner. So if you are worried about having something survive and you're kind of on the edge, plant it in a sheltered spot, which would be your south or southeast facing corner of your home. And then there's a microclimate even further down within your own landscape, for example, underneath a large tree, you know, things underneath, let's say a large oak or a live oak, which a lot of us have, that you're going to have a little bit of protection from the coldest weather as opposed to something that's in a very open spot. It doesn't have the protection of that canopy over it. And the actual science, the mechanisms, of how the heat and the cool rise and everything like that, I'm not 100% sure, but it kind of makes sense to me when you think about people running out and throwing sheets over everything. If you're growing, especially like we have a cacao tree, I haven't had time to throw sheets over it, so I'm just gonna let it do what it does. It's been here for a while, but that canopy is kind of mimicking, let's say, that sheet. It's holding a little bit more of that that warm air. So that's also a microclimate within your own landscape, which you can see.
Very cool. That's awesome.
Yeah. And Gia, are you close to the water?
Not particularly. As the crow flies, I think it's about maybe 10 or 11 miles. So I don't know if that's considered close. I'm right on the border of Seminole and Volusia County. I'm in this really weird little spot of Volusia that's near Lake Harney. So it's it's more inland for sure. Probably about as inland as you can get in Volusia.
Okay, gotcha. Do you have any types of like mature trees around your yard or around your neighborhood?
My neighborhood is mostly dominated. It's very wetlands in my specific neighborhood, and it's dominated by slash pine, Dahoon holly, wax myrtle. There's some oak. I don't know what kind of oak it is. I don't have any in my yard, which is weird. Okay. There's water oak in my yard, okay. but I think there's live oak in some of my neighbors' yards. But that's, I mean, it's really dominated by just like a handful of those trees, mainly slash pine.
Very cool. Okay. Nice. Awesome. Sounds like you have a nice little native area over there with the stuff that you mentioned. That's great.
Yeah, it's a very rural area. Yeah, absolutely. So everybody out here kind of has, a few acres, and so, which is nice because a lot of cool wildflowers and different things pop up. But yeah.
Oh, nice. I bet. All right. So just to kind of touch real quick about the ecological benefits of planting different things in your yard. Why am I bringing in different species from different parts of Florida? That's a whole other discussion. I think, and from what I've learned, that it is okay to bring something that would primarily exist in, let's say, a small portion of South Florida into Central Florida, if it can handle that, because a lot of those things were extirpated from areas we're not 100% sure that it was only in this one little chunk. So I think that's totally fine, but that could be another discussion. I'm curious to hear what everybody's opinion is on that. Urban restoration, conservation, in your urban area, you can plant a diversity of different types of native plants. If you're doing restoration, they're more concerned with preventing invasives from reinvading, preventing things like erosion. So they'll have just a few species that they're really trying to get established in there, and then hopefully keeping those species working over time and keeping invasive things out and restoring an area. And then conserving something is a totally different thing. What we're talking about with Pinellas County, Really in there, you're going to see what's actually already existing, and then removing invasives. And the reason I'm talking about that is that, yeah, if you want to plant something from South Florida in your yard, as long as you're not doing some kind of conservation mission or something like that, it's okay. So obviously, the more diversity you have, the different types of host plants and migratory species as the first things that came to my mind. Most, if not all, native plants have some sort of host insect or insects or birds associated with them in one way or the other. Every single one, because people ask me, oh, what's specific? I'm not sure for each and every single one. The most gaudy, I would say, insects are the ones that we pay the most attention to, of course, but there's such a huge diversity, an amazing diversity of different types of bees and flies and beetles and birds and mammals and everything in between, not even getting down to the smaller fauna in the soil that will use native plants. So we talked about microclimates as those little islands. And this is a picture of a longhorned bee, because we had some in our yard and they actually sleep on the plants. So they look very cool. They're a very cute little bee. So hopefully you guys can see some of those when they start popping up, when it starts warming up. So care, maintenance of your native plants. Care is simple for most plants, really. You don't have to think about it too hard usually. The biggest hurdle, I would say, in the beginning is to slow down and take your time and make sure you have the right plant in the right place. Really take your time to think about what you're putting where. Once they establish, usually very hardy. A lot of the plants I'm going to be talking about are very very drought tolerant, very tolerant of a lot of different soil conditions. It depends on where you're planting it again, but you can prune things back every year, removing excess growth depending on how big your yard is. A lot of the plants are fire adapted, so if you did prune something consistently, it would be totally fine. But it depends on what you have and how much space you have. Don't overwhelm your landscape. There's a lot of times where people will plant such a huge diversity of things in their yard and becomes kind of indiscernible. And that's something that we hear a lot from a lot of our maintenance clients, that they kind of went overboard. And not that it matters so much, but it does. The neighbors are not sure what's going on. Have you left the country? Did you fall asleep in your, like what's going on in your yard? So don't overwhelm it so fast. And generally pruning stuff after they flower. So just a couple little things I thought about with care and maintenance if you're going to plant any of these. So let's get to the plants we wanted to talk about. That's what we were here for. I hope these are rare and unique. If they're not, then you know more than me and tell me some more rare or uniquer plants. But I picked these because I like them, and they're primarily South Florida species. And again, these are all things that are available and that I've seen growing and planted and physically touched them, and they exist. So I'm going to keep the description relatively short, and you can see what you guys like. Cinnamon bark, which is called that because if you crush up the leaves and the bark, it does have a cinnamony smell to it, but don't use it as actual cinnamon bark. First of all, because I think you have to cut the whole, not the whole tree, but cut the branch off and strip the bark. But I believe it's, you don't want to ingest it. It has a nice crushed aromatic foliage, a nice little a reddish white flower that's born at the end of the leaves, so you can see the flowers really well. Salt tolerant, can grow in full sun on its own. Relatively slow in our area. It's going to be faster if you are in South Florida, and that's going to be true of all of these things. They're going to grow the most ideally in their South Florida climate, but they can grow well, if not as well, in our areas planted in the right space. So about 15 feet or so, really cool leaf to it. And also none of these are deciduous, as I was saying before with South Florida. But if it does get really cold and it freezes and they lose their leaves, that would be the only time that they would be like kind of forced deciduous. So the berries are used by birds. I love this one as an understory shrub, and the understory being if you have, your nice trees, you've got your ground covers, you got your shrubs and forbs. This would be something that would kind of fill in those spaces in between. But it has a really cool bark to it, and it has a nice twisty growth habit. It's not nice and straight, but it does have a really cool growth habit to it, and I think it's just really interesting foliage. So you'll hear the term specimen tree, so, or a specimen plant, something you're going to kind of set aside that you can direct guests from inside to your yard and show them the beautiful plants you have. So Canella winterana, cinnamon bark, love it. It should handle also 20-degree weather.
Very
So
cool.
yeah.
Can that one be trained as like a hedge, like a smaller kind of hedge that people might use closer to their home, or is it best just to let it do its thing and grow into like how tall would you say this gets? Any idea?
In our area, I haven't seen it any taller than like 10 or 15 feet.
Okay.
In the Keys in extreme South Florida, it can get up to 40 feet. But that's also after a very long time. It is slow growing even in South Florida. But in our area in Central Florida, it's going to be that 15 feet at the most, but it'd be kept a little bit smaller. If you wanted to keep it as an informal hedge, I believe that would help as well. But it would just have to be in the right place. You know, if you wanted it closer to your house, have it somewhere where you could only maybe prune it every couple years.
Gotcha. Okay. Very cool.
All right. Black ironwood or leadwood, Crugiodendron ferium. So the reason I picked this one out is because we had to take out an oak at Wilcox, and I suggested to Bruce that we plant a black ironwood, and surprisingly, he said, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do it. So I was pretty happy about that, and it's still growing now at the nursery, doing really well. It's called an ironwood. It's similar, if you guys have heard of lignum vitae, and I was considering picking lignum vitae. Gia, have you ever used lignum vitae before?
I have not used it personally. I've heard of it though. I didn't think it was for my area, so I think that was one that I avoided.
Generally not. Yeah, it's a little more common, which is why I didn't. I picked this one instead. But when you have something that has extremely dense, heavy, hard wood, it's usually going to be something that is exceedingly slow growing, which is true of the lignum vitae, which also is going to grow the best in more South Florida climates. But the ironwood seems to do really well in our area. The new growth comes out a nice reddish pink, has a really pretty glossy leaf to it, a twisty trunk, but you don't need to prune it ever. If you put it in the right space, it's probably something you can just let do its thing. The full sun is, I would say, a small to medium tree. So small tree being 10 feet or less, medium being, I would say, like a 10 to 20 foot. Just so everyone understands what I'm saying, small or medium tree, and very wind tolerant. You know, these trees that are very have that dense, heavy wood, it's really hard to break a branch off of it. It really is. So this is going to take a ton of a wind, no problem. So that is the black ironwood. The next one.
If you don't mind, we had a question from Matthew Hopkins about cinnamon bark, if you don't mind. He's asking if you know if it could be grown in 9A in North Florida in Clay County. Would that be a stretch, do you think?
So cinnamon bark should be able to take winter temperatures that drop into the mid-20s. So if it gets into the mid-20s, so like 20 to 25, I would say it would be the max. Lower than 20, there is a chance that it would freeze internally. You know, the actual inner portion of it would sustain some damage. So if you're in your area right now and it hasn't gotten below those mid-20s, then yeah, I would say go for it and give it a try.
Okay, very cool. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. No, thank you for Matthew. Thank you for the question. I'm not sure where Clay County is. I had to learn all the counties of Florida in 8th grade, and shock, I don't remember. But Clay County,
I don't remember either. I'm sorry. I'm pretty bad at that too.
I should know. I should be like, oh yeah, Clay County. County seat is yeah. Let me double check what Clay County is. All right. Okay, cool. Okay, so you're outside of St. Augustine. Oh, that's neat. Cool. Yeah, I think you would be okay there. And it looks like you're near the river too. So if you're near the St. Johns River, again, that's that microclimate we were talking about, where if you're next to a body of water, it doesn't just have to be the ocean, but next to a lake or a river, that water it doesn't, you notice, just for example, when you think of the top of your head, when you see snow next to a river, there could still be a flowing, moving river that hasn't frozen, but you'll have ice and snow right next to it. Again, the actual physical and chemical reasons that happens, I'm not sure, but the water body is going to hold a little bit more heat for you. So again,
Oh,
if you're near
gotcha.
a body of water, and then south or southeast corner of your house, or under the loving embrace of a large canopy tree, something that's going to be able to guard it from wind, for example, things like that. So there's a lot of other steps you can take, and yeah, hopefully you can get a chance to grow this one up in your area.
Very cool.
So I did pick a Sideroxylon, and Sideroxylon is Bammelia. It's a pretty big family of plants. Some of them occur much further north, actually, up into zone 5, the Bammelia species. This is one that, again, Bruce, the owner of Wilcox, brought in, and we planted it on a beach planting just a little bit south of us. It has a really beautiful white flower that you can see. It's right next to the petiole of the leaf, where the leaf attaches to the stem. Really, really pretty, nice smelling flower. And again, it has a regular growth habit. A lot of these, and maybe it's indicative of a lot of different types of South Florida shrubs, or maybe it's just the ones I picked, but they have a very open, irregular, different type of branching habit. But this one can get, I've seen it get up to 40 feet in its native habitat, but in our area, again, it's going to be a medium-sized tree for the most part. And it's called the willow bussa because it does have these really cool arching branches. It's going to be really salt tolerant, very tolerant of also shell. If you have a shell yard, most of Florida has a lot of that limestone underlayer. It's going to really enjoy that. And it's just going to have great little flowers, great for pollinators. I really like it, but this one cannot get any frost. So this is going to be one where you're not going to be able to grow that further inland or further north than, what we would consider that like 9B area. You don't want to let this thing get actually into some frost. So
very cool. Is this, we got a comment from Debbie Chaya. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. And she's asking if it's a thornless species. I don't know, Debbie, if you are referring to what he's talking about right now, this willow, or if you were talking about one of the other trees. Did any of the trees you presented on have thorns on them?
So the Sideroxylon, Bammelia is what I was mentioning, and there's gum Bammelia and tough Bammelia, gum bully and tough bully, and those both do have some pretty wicked thorns. This one does not. But
okay.
I'm not against thorns. It really, again, right plant, right place. We have a wild lime in our yard, which is a pretty cool small tree or large devilish shrub with extremely sharp hooked thorns on it, but it's a great host plant for the giant swallowtail butterfly. And another cool thing to remember about thorns is it's great for your migratory and small birds to hide from predators. So think about that also as well when you're placing any of your thorny species that you want to use. But this one does not.
Okay.
But thank you for that question. Appreciate it. So the next one I want to talk about is lancewood. Lancewood actually naturally occurs, Gia, on your coast. And this is a cool one that we had just brought into the nursery before I left. Called lancewood actually because of the very long, up to 6-inch lanceolate or lance-shaped leaves. And it gets these beautiful bursts of white fragrant flowers. And it's also, like I said, all of these things are going to have be a host plant for something. This one for the Florida dusky wing and the red banded hair streak. I don't know if you guys have seen hair streak butterflies before, but they're pretty freaking magical. They're pretty amazing little butterflies, and easy to maintain. Again, this is something where you put it in the right place, let it do its thing. It's not going to drop a ton of branches. It's not going to be something you're going to have to pick up after all the time. And it's a really beautiful tree that you can maintain at that smaller height as well. If you didn't want it to get 30 feet, you can have a good arborist come out and healthfully keep it a little bit shorter. But lancewood, this is another great one. And I try to stay away from the huge trees because there are some that are obviously much bigger. But for the most part, I'm assuming, I guess maybe I assumed wrong because Gia said she has a big space, but that you don't have a ton of space. Where we are in Pinellas County, there's not as much large space for some of these bigger tree species. So we got to keep things to that small and medium size because most yards are already full to the max.
That's a very cool tree. When does it flower? Does it just flower once per year like most things, or does it come like all year?
It's going to flower once per year. I'm not sure about the flowering time, actually. Assuming that it is going to be a South Florida species, it's not going to flower during the winter or the fall. Probably going to be spring and summer.
Very cool.
If you guys, you can double check me on that, but I'm not 100%.
Very cool. Thank you.
Yeah. So this one has been growing at the nursery at Wilcox in the ground for a while. It's about 5 feet wide and maybe 4 feet tall. And it has a really nice paddle-shaped leaf to it. It's called maidenberry. Not sure why it's called maidenberry. And also apologize for the change of font. I forgot to change that font there. But maidenberry is going to be drought tolerant, salt tolerant. This is a nice small shrub, a full sun. This is definitely going to be one you're going to want to have in full sun. And I've seen the birds actively going after and eating all the berries on it, similar to, when the shiny coffee gets its berries on it, they're actually planted right near each other. So maidenberry, a shrub that you guys could potentially try to use. And it is one that was available at a few nurseries again. I haven't personally used it in my own yard, but I saw it for years at Wilcox, and it has just a really nice leaf shape to it. It's nice and dense. All of these pictures aren't going to give you all the ideas of what everything looks like. So I definitely encourage you to look at what else is out there as far as on the internet to get an idea of what the full shrub actually looks like. But I like this one the best because of the leaf shape to it. Very, very nice. I really enjoyed that part of it. And full sun, very, very drought tolerant. I wanted to add some wildflowers. So in the end of the presentation, I'll definitely tell you guys about where I found some of this information about the different types of wildflowers. But Carphephorus corymbosus, it's just one that's fun to say. So Carphephorus corymbosus is Florida paintbrush. This is becoming a little more widely available. This will grow throughout most of Florida in sandy, scrubby, sandhill type areas. But that means it would work great in a yard that is sandy and well drained. The only thing you wouldn't want to put this in is a very wet or mucky area or somewhere where the water stands for more than, I would say like a day. If it drains out after that, it might be fine. But it's a wildflower that I hope to see more widely propagated soon. But it is something that is available, you can get. And this is going to flower in the fall. I have a lot of great fall flowering wildflowers. And the Florida paintbrush is one of them. And it is just a magnet for pollinators of all kinds. Everything you can imagine will come on these. And it's just a beautiful flower. It has a basal rosette of leaves all year. So it is perennial as well, which is important. I know to a lot of people, you don't want to have annual things kind of popping up and spreading everywhere, but this will stay in one place, unless it seeds, of course. And it has a nice basal rosette of leaves that will be around all year. But this is a great one that will work from most of South Florida into Central Florida as well, even into parts of North Florida. It's an awesome one that I hope is more readily available soon. So we use a lot of this in our area, even though it is only occurring, like it said, in Key Largo. Cinecord. I just kind of like the name of it. It makes me kind of think of cinnamon for some reason, but it just really properly captures this tree in my mind. If you've ever had any experience with sweet acacia, it is a very thorny tree, although very beautiful. So this is the acacia without the thorns, essentially, but with a very beautiful brown kind of scaled bark. Very, very pretty. leaves and the new growth comes out, nice light green. And then the best part, you get these awesome smelling yellow puffball flowers, very fragrant. The wildlife love them. Birds will eat the fruit afterwards, and it's very tolerant of a lot of different conditions. This one's going to like full sun to part sun. A lot of the acacia species are definitely going to like that really full sun. And it can be turned into a small tree like you see this one here, or it can be left to be a little bit more scrangly and more different stems crossing through it, but it can be turned into a very nice small specimen tree. So I love cinecord. We use this a lot. I had to add this one because not a lot of people know we do have native crotons. This is a really cool one. The leaf is a very scrub adapted type leaf. It has that very like rough texture to it, almost like a rosin flower with a thin branching leaves coming off of it. And it actually is kind of like a small shrub, I would say. But I would still say, yeah, it's a wildflower as well. Wildflower, small shrub sometimes kind of crosses over, and it occurs in that very, very rare, very endangered, and still being developed every day pine rocklands habitat. So further south you get in Florida, you get actually parts where there's going to be exposed limestone, and that's where the pine rocklands are. And then you'll have a plant like this occurring in that area. So it's going to be very, very tough. It has a beautiful little white flower. It is a native croton, which is really cool, and exceedingly drought tolerant and available. This is something that we did have a few times, but it was just something that it's not for everybody because it's not widely used. So you don't really know what it's going to do. I noticed a lot of people will revert back to what they know and understand before being adventurous. I encourage everyone to be adventurous, of course. Try it out. And so the pineland croton is a great one. I really love this one, and it occurs all over. Yeah, from South Florida, it'll be fine into Central Florida as well.
Very cool. Yeah, I wanted to apologize really quick. I don't know if anything happened, but my internet had kicked me off for 1 second, so I was off for like a minute of your presentation. My apologies, but I'm back.
God. It was the most important minute you missed.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I'm back.
It'll never be back again. It's all right. Life goes on.
I'll rewatch the video later. It's fine. It's fine. The pineland croton is really cool. There's a member in the Florida Native Gardening group who has like a whole kind of like a whole side of the wall of her house with pineland croton, and that she's kind of trying to make it into like a little shrub in that area, which is really neat. And she had asked a question previously about if it was okay to trim it, I guess, to make it kind of bush out a little bit. So I don't know if you have experience with like pruning pineland croton, if you could make more of like a bushy shrub out of it, or how that would work.
I bet you could, and that's really awesome that that you have that that growing so well in your space. I think that's really cool. I do know that they grow these from cuttings as well as from the seed. So I don't see any reason why you wouldn't be able to, but if you have enough of it, just experiment, give it a try. Maybe wait until it warms up a little bit more. I wouldn't do it yet. Maybe March or April, right before that spring burst of growth. Clip a little bit of it, make note of where you clipped, or even just like clip one, come back and see how it reacts. I'm sure it would be fine, but it is a good question because, for example, I don't know if you guys have any experience with sea lavender. It's a beautiful drought tolerant silvery shrub with white flowers, but you can't prune it really. You cut the stem, the whole stem will die. So you'd have to cut off. Yeah. So it's a great plant to use, but you have to let it kind of get to where it wants, and then you selectively like remove the whole stem. Whereas I think something like this, since it has so many different branching points, as you can see in this picture, I bet you would be able to cut right above one of those nodes and just observe it. See, I bet it would pop out some more, and then you can try to grow it from some cuttings and start a native nursery up there in your area. You got some pretty rare stuff. It's cool stuff. It really is. And it's a lot of these pine rocklands plants are very, very rare. A lot of them are endangered. So it's really important that we propagate these,
Yeah, this was, so like I said, this was a member from the Florida Native Gardening Group. I don't know if she's watching this today, but if she's not watching this, then I'll pass on your information, because that's awesome. I think that would be helpful for
Yeah,
her. I thought it was really cool to see like so many. She had several plants all along her house, and that's
cool.
fantastic. So yeah, thank you.
Super cool. Awesome. Yeah, you guys have a great nursery near you too as well. Green Isles
Yeah,
Nursery. I
yeah,
guess that's kind of near you. Not really, but I mean, I think it's still kind of far.
hour and a
Groveland.
half. Yeah,
Yeah.
hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on if you take toll roads. Yeah, I was helping them out for a little bit, so I got to work with them and Mark and April and Mac and some wonderful people that work there. So yeah,
Oh, that's
they're a
awesome.
fantastic nursery.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, they're great. I mean, but we need, and that's something that, FAN, the Florida Association of Native Nurseries, and FNPS, and everybody, we need more people doing these things. Just as a side note of starting native retail nurseries, native landscaping, native maintenance is a huge need for it. If anybody wants to move to Pinellas County and has native plant expertise and maintenance experience, you got a job out here for sure. But because there's just a huge need for it. So, and all these things with native plants. I mean, Florida has the biggest agricultural plant industry of growing plants. I think California has a bigger overall agriculture industry, but Florida has the biggest in the country of growing plants, selling plants, propagating plants, and it's just a drop in the bucket of all the tropical nonsense, all the Home Depot stuff that's out there, but there's just not the numbers of native plants. So, just a side
yeah,
note, anybody needs to be encouraged to do that. There's definitely resources out there, FAN, different things like that, to start a propagation, retail nursery, things like that.
absolutely. So Gail, got a question from Gail, and she's asking, do you know if Garbaria can be cut back? Mine has gotten very leggy and laying on the ground. Any idea about pruning Garbaria?
So Garbaria also is another one that I don't think it really likes to be cut back that severely. What I would do also is, if you have a chance, collect the seed. It should still have some seed on it this time of the year, or if you already harvested it and try to propagate some yourself. That's one that we have had at the nursery. We planted it at a couple clients' homes. I haven't pruned it back so hard. I've clipped a couple stems back, but I would say the same thing to the person who had the pine limb croton. Pick a small portion of it, cut it back a little bit, see how it reacts. But I also see it all the time kind of flopped over as kind of like a goofy looking shrub. It's never a nice straight erect plant. It can lay on the side and grow perfectly fine like that for a long time. Like, that's not anything that's gonna mess with it. So you also could, if you wanted to, if it was in the way, you could carefully stake it up. Maybe some sort of small cage you can put on it, or you can put a little bamboo stake and kind of gently tie some. There's some great like Velcro reusable Velcro garden ties that we started to use, because we use some of that plastic stuff, but this stuff you can adjust it, you can take it, we can reuse it. So you could also try that. But Garbaria is awesome. I love using Garbaria. So yeah, those are the things I would suggest.
Very cool. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. No, thank you for the question. All right. And this is a locust berry. So this is something we had for a short time at the nursery. And the reason this one I thought was so cool was, not only did I love the flower buds, they have this very unique crimped shape on them, but the flowers change from white to pink to red. So they kind of go through this. Again, why, I'm not sure, but they go through these stages of maturity with a flower. And on the plant, at the same time, you'll have white, you'll also have the pink and the red. So it's kind of all changing and all moving at the same time. It's a host plant, again, for the Florida dusky wing. I think it was another one that we also mentioned was a host plant for the Florida dusky wing. And a lot of these host plant suggestions, it's not gonna bring those butterflies to your area. If you live in St. Augustine and something is only occurring in Miami-Dade County, it's not going to show up. but it will still be a beneficial resource for all the other things that you have in your yard as well, and also just a unique piece of your landscape that is still native, but it's not going to bring those different types of, let's say, some butterflies. But we do have a lot of generalist native insects that will use a lot of these different things if they're in the same a general genus of plants. But this one, yeah, full sun. It's going to be a small shrub here in Central Florida. In South Florida, it does get a little bit bigger. It can even turn into a small tree, 15 or 20 feet. A really dense, beautiful, again, kind of like a paddle lanceolate shaped leaf, an evergreen, very drought tolerant. It seemed in our area at Wilcox, it wasn't happy at the nursery because it was getting too wet. So it definitely needs that well-drained soil as well. But a really, really cool plant that should be able to, take the Central Florida climate as well. And this one is a super cool one. We had at Wilcox for a little while. I love the prickly pear cactuses that we have. We have a couple native ones. It's Opuntia, and the species name I didn't get it actually. I apologize for that. I was halfway through adding it. I knew it was in that genus, but I forgot what the species was. But it's called Keys Joe Jumper, and I don't know why exactly they call it, but when we brought those to the nursery, there were pollinators literally jumping up and down to get on it. It was completely loaded with every kind of bee imaginable, especially bees, but also small moths, small butterflies. As you know, different types of prickly pear cactuses will do. They like the very well draining soil, the sandiness. This one actually grows in sand deposits that occur in between exposed limestone is where it would naturally grow in the Keys area. So a very hardy, super tough plant. Like it says, it's very endangered. So it's something that's highly endangered, but it's super cool because there's actually people out there propagating it. And this is the last one that I had mentioned. So I just wanted to kind of add this one in here. You know, a lot of the cactus species are very can be very cold tolerant, so that one should do well in Central Florida area. It did fine for us here in Pinellas County and Tampa Bay area. And I wanted to add some terms here at the end, which I thought were very interesting that I had never heard before till I researched the Opuntia, but the cladode and the glockid. So cladode or cladode, does anyone, Gia, do you know what those terms are?
I do not. I know I should. I do not. I'm still learning my scientific terms.
Does anyone out there know what those terms mean? It's specifically to the cactus. To this type of cactus. It's for a lot of different succulent type things, but so
not seeing any comments coming, so maybe
the cladode or the cladode is actual the paddle. So that you notice that, you know, when you see a cactus, there's not really any leaves on it. Well, that cladode, that paddle, what we call it, is a modified stem. So it's all green, so it photosynthesizes like a leaf would, but also that's the growing portion of it too. So it's the stem and the leaf at the same time, essentially. So now you can wow everybody with the new term you learned, the cladode or cladode, and then you can tell me how to pronounce it. And
very
glockid.
Cool.
Glockid are those tiny little hair-like spikes that surprise you when you get your hand past the 3 or 4 inch spikes and you think you're in the clear, and then you're spending a lot of time with a little pair of tweezers trying to pick out the glockids out from your hand. So those are those terms. Now you know them.
Very cool. Now I know what name to curse when I'm pulling those out of my fingers. So that's fantastic.
Yes, exactly. It's kind of a cute name, glockid. I don't know. It kind of has a nice ring to it. But so thank you, everybody. I hope I gave you guys some cool stuff to think about, to possibly use. I just want to encourage everybody to be able to research a lot of things and try different stuff in their yard. And real quick, I don't know if. Let's see. I would love to take any questions, but also, Gia, I could show everybody some of the research materials, some of the books that I recommend.
Yeah, sure. I know that there's a few questions that we kind of missed. That the chat was pretty active here with all the stuff. So I want to make sure I'm not missing anybody here. So let me go through all of our social media posts here and see what we got.
Awesome.
So
I just stopped sharing the other screen. Am I okay right now?
Yeah. Can you see? So if I put a question up, are you able to view it?
Let's see.
I'll put one up in a second. Debbie says, "Congratulations on your baby."
Oh, thank you. Awesome.
And let's see what else we got here. All right. Let's take that one. All right. So Debbie also had another question for us. She wants to know what you recommend for heavy shade, shrub or small tree. So anything for South Florida for small or heavy shade that you recommend?
Yeah, that would be your the cinnamon bark. What I was talking about in there. Cinnamon bark will do well in the shadier area, and another one that's pretty common, but it actually is a South Florida species, is your marlberry, M-A-R-L. Marlberry will work well. So that's a common one, but that one will do great in shade and is a South Florida species. So
those are beautiful.
Yeah, that fits the bill as well. And then the Bamelia that we had mentioned, the gum Bamelia and the tough Bamelia, those will also grow well in shadier areas also. So those are some other things you can do in that area.
Okay, great. Thank you. And she had another question as well. She says her locust berry hasn't flowered and she's had it for 10 years. Is there a reason why maybe it's not flowering for her?
Well, every once in a while, when something like that happens, you can always start to try some of the more standard landscape things, putting a slow release granular fertilizer on it and give that a try. It's not something that's going to kill it, but it could be something that it needs a little bit more richness in the soil, or maybe it's missing just a few micronutrients. Even if it grows in something like a hammock in South Florida, there's still some certain conditions potentially in there that it's missing in your yard. So I would give that a try. Sometimes the pH, it's going to be used to a very alkaline soil. Maybe it's very acid, so it's not being pushed to flower. So those are just a couple ideas I would say, especially if it's been in as long, I think you said 10 years, which is pretty cool that you've had that for that long. I'm sorry it hasn't flowered for you yet.
Okay, I think we have maybe just one more question, then I'd love to hear about the resources that you have.
Awesome.
So let's see, Sarah asks, and I'm kind of curious about this too, because she's asking, is it possible to recreate a sandy soil environment in a large pot? Any tips on that? Because it seems like sand in pots, it tends to compact and it's weird. I don't know if you have any tips for something like that.
Yeah, that's great. So for example, when we get, and this is just what I've seen from the growers that grow things like scrub mints, the large flowered rosemary, green eyes, things like that, the plants that like to have a nice deep taproot, drain out well, aren't happy in kind of mucky soil, which is, Sarah, I'm sure that's what you're trying to avoid. What they do is they use a ton of perlite with sand with a little bit of soil. So I've seen that, and then I've also seen instead of perlite, vermiculite. So that's something that you could try. So adding more of those things. Sorry, my wife is behind me here. She's just
no worries.
I can try to say something.
My kids were knocking on the door earlier, so I totally get it.
Yeah, so I would give that a try. Really, like way more than you would think. Like it was like 50% plus perlite. There was still some sand in it, and then some of what you would consider like your standard soil, like your processed bark and things like that, to help. And then also make sure the pot has plenty of proper drainage holes, and that what you can also do is elevate it. Keep it a foot or two up, and that gravity will also help for things to drain down. You never want to put for example, like a dune sunflower on the ground where it's going to stay wet, the roots rot so fast. They need nice airflow. You know, in soil, actually, a portion of soil is oxygen. You know, and sandy soil has a ton of airspace in between those pores. So that's just something that I've learned because Bruce would get on my case all the time for doing sunflowers on the ground. I'm like, oh, Bruce, it's Florida summertime. It's going to rain every day. But that's just something that was kind of hammered in my head.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for the tips. This has been an absolutely wonderful presentation. For the resources that you were talking about, was that on your slideshow? Do we need to bring your slideshow back up? Or?
Actually, I just have, because I love these different types of books. So some of my favorite ones, this one, I think it's just fun. It's called The Weeds of Southern Turfgrass.
Very nice.
It's actually UF. So it's from like the 80s and the 90s when they're putting it together. So again, this is before the word, you know, native was even common. And a lot of these things that were seen as weeds, like for example, yellow top, gaillardia, fleabane, all these really cool things are now considered weeds. But if you really want to know all the little things, which I think is the next frontier, if you guys know the trees, you know the shrubs, you know the wildflowers, now you need to start looking at the less pretty stuff in between everything else. There's a ton of stuff like that. So I love that one. And then anything by, this would be great, Debbie, for Native Plants for Shady Landscapes by Craig Hegel.
That's a great one. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. I love that. And then Florida Wildflowers, Walter Kingsley Taylor. Very, very cool. Separated by native plant communities, but he also gives a really good introduction into taxonomy, different types of environments in Florida. And then the last one I used today for some of the trees was Trees of Florida by a gentleman named Gil Nelson. If you look at any of the UF articles, a lot of them are written by Gil Nelson about trees. So there's some great resources out there and some really passionate people about Florida native plants. So.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think that pretty much wraps it up. I think we did great today. We're right over an hour, so I think that's good. I think we got all of our questions. If we didn't get your questions, please feel free to comment, and we'll get back to you in some way. Couplet Fern will get back with you, and we'll make sure that we can get your questions answered. But thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Stefan, and we'll
thank you so much. Thank you guys. Thank you guys. Follow us on Instagram. Wise hand.